Hi everyone, Jonathan Munitz here. I'm recording this video today a little bit differently than I normally do here on the Hill of Roses because we had a rather big event occur recently, and I felt like it was important for me to really be able to just talk to you all directly about it. And this event that I'm talking about is the dropout of Andrew Yang. And so I wanted to just give a summary of really what this campaign really meant to me, what some of our strengths and weaknesses were through this process, some of the factors that really are unjust that made this run all the much more difficult, and where we and I should be going forward with this Yang Gang movement and this platform that is really not going to die today. I'm gonna be honest. I decided to record this today rather than 2 days ago or even yesterday, because frankly, I wanted time to be able to really digest um, what this campaign meant to me, what I could be doing going forward. And frankly, I really didn't feel like crying in front of you all giving a reaction. I was rather emotional the past few days. I can't guarantee it's not going to happen while talking through this now, but I think I am a little bit more at ease and have a little bit more clarity of where things are going in the future for this Yang Gang movement. I know very often people on this channel uh, might tune out after 3 minutes of hearing the discussion and what the topics are. But today I'm going to be rambling for a bit. I'm going to be talking this out because I didn't really want to come in with notes, a prepared speech like I've done in the past, having other people talk and me ask them questions. Today I want to share my voice. I want to say what this movement meant to me, and for those that are willing to listen and hear what I have to say, I'm really appreciative of that fact. So what I really wanted to talk about today, and kind of reflecting through this dropout and this movement overall, is really talk about where I've been in knowing about this campaign and about this movement and its rises and falls. Talking to you about the corruption of some of our cable news organizations and oligarchs playing a specific role on the 2020 election, how this campaign has its real big strengths that we need to be keeping on pushing forward with and embracing going forward, but that it was not perfect overall and that it has some weaknesses that we all need to overcome. I would like to be able to say some specific words to Andrew Yang if any day he somehow stumbled across this video. And then finally, I want to talk to you all, Yang Gang, non Yang Gang alike, about where I'm going to be going as an individual going forward and as a political advocate, as well as where I think the overall Yang Gang movement should be going. So, to start, I want to talk about what my experience was really start to finish with the Yang Gang. As many of you know, I used to be a Bernie Sanders supporter through the 2016 election. That's really when I first got onto Twitter. I really was plugging away as kind of a nobody, like many people are on Twitter, feeling kind of alone, but active because it was the off cycle of an election. We were trying to rebuild this movement, and I was starting to get myself involved with the DSA. I was very hopeful through the election cycle where we had some really big overturns in Congress in 2018 with the likes of the Squad and many others just flipping the House blue. I have been frustrated through this Trump administration for many reasons, being that, frankly, yes, there are some of the complaints that most everyday Americans say. He's uncouth, he's not a very smart leader, we're not getting much done. But I've just seen how divided we really became, and I became part of that division, even myself. I felt myself becoming very negative and cynical because I felt like my first real exposure to politics was getting my hopes up as being heard finally, and then seeing an active case of someone having the establishment rig things against them, have someone with a very, at least, conflicting record of being flip-floppy, being a follower to change rather than a leader on it. There are many things you could say about Hillary Clinton, but this video is not about it. And seeing how even after the campaign collapsed, Bernie right along came with the unity. They had the lawsuits going against the DNC. They concluded that the rigging was completely allowed. And as much as we grabbed the Overton window, this power struggle really led to this overall frustration in the country that really led to Donald Trump's election. This, I want to tear the whole thing down. And I still have some of those feelings to this day that we all see it continuing to happen. It's not like it stopped that year. And so come 2019, I was very much a strong believer that I was going to become another Bernie supporter through 2020. He had geared himself up towards, I think, the beginning of February, and there was some speculation whether I was going to support Tulsi or Warren at this point of the year. And he came along, and I was like, okay, it's go time. We're going to have another election. We're going to have another shot at it. And I, at the same time, really started this channel at that same point. I wanted to have a voice to be able to really heal some of this division in the country and really be able to talk about the policies that made the progressive movement so strong. I wanted to be able to bring some of that human factor where many of these people who were voiceless previously had a voice to be able to say what was important to them and what was not. And so at the very beginning, yes, I was doing some policies and kind of talking about myself, but then I wanted to kind of get my teeth into what everyone really talked about. I would love to talk about policy all day, but people care about the horse race. People care who's in this race because they care about the people who are trying to represent them and the leadership that they have and the solutions that they have to drive this country forward. And so this came to the first point in which I found out about Andrew Yang. I was doing a video, I think it was called the Best Backup video. And I, fully going in, was basically declared that, you know what, I have declared I'm a Bernie supporter. I want to make that clear. So everyone but Bernie is really going to be considered through this video. And I started to look up the candidates. I found it from a Wikipedia page, actually, about Andrew Yang. And I had looked through all of the different candidates, whether it be basic platitudes, a lot of unclear messaging of what they really supported, some records of past bills that they did that were not great. I was feeling very uninspired overall. And I came to Andrew Yang's page, and I was fully expecting, like, oh, this is not going to be anything that's really going to blow me away. Like, I've seen so many of these policy pages now that it's kind of all blended together. It's really wonky and at the same time non-specific. Like, it's hard to do that, but they managed to do it. There's like something to that traditional establishment politician that they know how to make it sound like they know what they're saying by getting into the technicalities, but then also not really saying all that much. And I came to Yang's page, and the first three things that came out really grabbed me. I had been a fan of universal basic income for a reasonable amount of time. Bernie had been supportive of this idea a little bit more so in 2016. And I liked it in theory, but I wasn't necessarily an advocate back then. But I liked the idea of being able to have this redistributive method to be able to re-empower our economy when there's been such economic inequality. Back then, that was kind of where I felt as kind of a more Bernie supporter. It was really just this baffling level of economic inequality, and so redistribution in some ways made sense to me and was appealing, but I never really sunk my teeth into all the ways it could impact me. And so that was kind of an interesting method that I saw him being unique in. I didn't see anyone else supporting it, and it was very clear that this is something he wanted to bring to the table, a very unique factor that made him him. The second factor was he was a supporter of Medicare for all. I myself was a very, very big Medicare for all proponent. I still consider myself a pretty big Medicare for all proponent. I think anyone who's watched me through this movement has known that healthcare has been one of the thorns in my side and something that I've been really strongly advocating for to ensure that we have some baseline universal healthcare program that we all pay into. And so seeing him back then being even a single payer supporter was really big to me. I thought that this was something where I could say, you know what? I know that I have now two potential progressives in this lane. And then the third thing that I saw was his, human-centered capitalism. And I thought, as someone who had just kind of joined the democratic socialist movement, I was a little skeptical at the time. I think any person who came from the Bernie Sanders camp and that was really kind of in the fold of how capitalism has been causing a lot of these problems might be a little mistrustful of it, because it sounds like you might nibble around the edges, that we're gonna, it's the good flavor of capitalism, but it's not gonna inherently change enough to really get at the heart of the problem. And so the more I dug into it, though, the idea of how we incentivize this economy, what we measure to do successfully in our way of life of sustaining a healthy standard of living is really moving to me. It reflected a lot of what I do for my own job. I work in project management essentially, and the fundamentals of how you track a project and how a country, a program, a project, anything that you're trying to take from start A to point B, you got to track what you're doing. You got to measure it. And so having all these flawed measurements that we knew were flawed, like how we talk about unemployment, but then we're not talking about labor participation rate, instead, the better metrics. How we're talking about GDP, but we see our life expectancy falling off a cliff. How we'll talk about the stock market going to record highs, but only 20% own like around 80% of the stock. So we're looking at a lot of these metrics and we're not really telling the truth. And I think that's a fundamental core of what Andrew Yang's campaign was in a lot of ways. It was about freedom. It was about truth. It was about humanity. In a lot of ways, he embodied that through his policy and his persona. And so I read through now to the rest of it, and I was blown away by how many he had. I was just like flabbergasted when all these people at this point in time were giving you rather vague titles. I remember Warren just had 5 sections with nothing, but she was the plans person. And Yang came at it with like 140 policies. And I'm like really blown away. And then you click on each of them. It's not just like the headline titles. And you see how he presents his vision. And then he has very clear, this is what we're going to get done. This is where I can come in and actually impose some influence as the president, and where I'm hoping that I can not promise you it, but I'm going to tell Congress to guide it in this direction. I thought it was really interesting seeing how he touched on the themes of family and how he touched on technology way more than any other candidate. I thought it was fascinating how he was one of the candidates who would really actually embrace nuclear in his environmental proposal. At the time, I wasn't for that necessarily, but I found that it was unique of him to be able to put that as a distinguishing factor. I thought it was just interesting to like the granularity of the ideas he came up with, like the ideas of coming up with banning the penny, knowing that we have to do the timing of our businesses to help small businesses get paid more frequently from these large businesses. The ideas of robocalling. There's just so many just like, you think they're small, but they would make a large impact on our lives types of ideas. And I was kind of like very surprised. I was like, wow, he is clearly thought this through. I had disagreements with him. I think at the time I had 10 policy disagreements that I called out in that video too. And I was debating at the time between him and Tulsi Gabbard as who the best backup would be. And I decided during that video I would make Andrew Yang my best backup. Now, this was very short-lived. I very quickly, in like 2 days, found out that Yang had not been particularly consistent on his healthcare messaging. That'll be a theme that we'll notice throughout this campaign a little bit. But I still really liked him. I thought he was really bringing interesting, innovative solutions to the table. I was worried that he didn't necessarily have political experience, or he wouldn't have a chance. And on top of that, I had my policy disagreements where I thought, I liked the idea of UBI, but I didn't like his version. And I think that's something that you heard from a lot of Bernie supporters. Even if I eventually myself was convinced from a lot of the arguments, I think you really saw that there was a lot of interest in the idea, but that it wasn't exactly how they wanted it. And so they would poke holes and say, you know what? Well, I know Bernie has a chance here. I know we're still fighting for that. And I know these solutions are good. But over time, I learned from being receptive to all the information you as individuals did. It wasn't necessarily Yang himself that really won me over through his speaking, although I was impressed in how he handled himself through the debates in the early summer. But it was really your efforts as an online community to really spread the information, do it in a way that was respectful, enthusiastic, that did it in a fun manner. I won't lie. It's easy for a meme to potentially get a laugh and therefore get a learn. It's one of the fundamental ways I say you have to do teaching in general is you have to entertain people and get their ears before you can put knowledge in those ears. So your ability to be advocates was so well done. And it really won me on a couple of key things. It helped that you even won Yang on a couple of key things. It happened when the disability concern was alleviated from my mind because you all pushed him on SSI to make sure that that was something that was duplicative. It came from you all pushing him on media and the idea of the ombudsman that he eventually pulled back from over time. Those were big things that you pulled him that really helped win me too. It showed that he was listening to you all and that you were an interconnected movement with your candidate who was really trying to tap into the kind of intelligence of the internet to both fuel him as a candidate and improve his actual policy platform. And then you convinced me because, well, first there's the UBI argument. I wasn't a fan of that at the time. You'll even see in that best backup video on this channel. That was one of the reasons I didn't like it. Mainly because I thought of it as just another sales tax that was a regressive tax. I thought of it as a way that would simply encourage importation over exportation and not help with our trade deals. But I saw he had solutions for that in his later iterations of the funding mechanisms of the Freedom Dividend, to be able to include taxation on importations as well. That's similar to this VAT. I saw it when I learned more about the welfare system too. I always thought that the idea of having to drop out of these programs was regressive, because fundamentally you're going to be hurting the worse off, and that it's not really redistributive if you're taking this uniquely away from them. But then you learn how undermining these systems are and how they're not helping in a large part already, how so many eligible people are not getting onto them, and that sometimes in order to make something new, there are temporary pains to build something sustainable. It's like the examples of people working in the fossil fuel industry. We all know we need to take action on climate change and move towards a more sustainable future, but that's going to hurt the people that work in the oil and gas industry. Like, there's no way around that unless we collectively will then make future initiatives to help them. And so to build this new floor of sustainability and really make proper incentives while sustaining a baseline sustainability for humans of a $12,000 floor, I think was a necessary step over time. I also was persuaded on the point of nuclear energy, as I had mentioned beforehand, and how it wasn't necessarily uranium that was the big advocation of expansion. It was that we would keep our existing supplies, we wouldn't try to artificially phase them out when they represent over 50% of our existing non-carbon based fuels, and that we would look to expand thorium going forward as an energy source. And so all these things over time during the summer were really moving to me, and I was building friendships kind of with the community, even if we were on different sides. I've always respected people who are just good people that are enjoyable to talk to, that bring knowledge to the conversation. We can come to different decisions of where we may lie, but if we interact with each other in a mutually beneficial manner, why try and isolate yourselves due to labels of candidate? I think that during the same time period, I was also like feeling that the movement I was in was getting a little bit, maybe a little too radical. Just in, I've always aspired to be like an entrepreneur myself, and I've always been someone who wants to be able to make a business someday. And kind of being in those circles, and also being kind of a white guy too. I was very often just like not like treated all that well, just personally. And sometimes I would also make points where I would stand up for Yang on certain policies, or say you don't have this exactly right, or try and unite people in a way. Help people who are Yang supporters get along better with Bernie supporters, have Bernie supporters get along better with Yang supporters. Still, as I've kind of tried doing a little bit to this day, although there are moments astray, that I definitely have encouraged my own amount of divisiveness. But I was called very often a mole within like the Bernie movement at that point, and I was being won over policies at the same time. I was seeing very often the tactic of advocating for Bernie was just to attack others. And I didn't like being part of that. Like, I liked the idea that we were actually talking about the ideas and their merits. Not that we would just throw a label on you and that's it. We're just going to try and shame you into shutting up, rather than trying to convince you that we do have the better idea, and not just on a moral level, but that it is economically makes sense to do as well, that it was going to benefit us all, that it wasn't just working people, it wasn't just one identity of community, but that we're in it for us all, and that we're not going to just try and hate on other people. And I saw the Yang movement was really about being able to bridge a lot of this divide, and that it was about the policy, it was about the data underlying a lot of these policies and why they made sense, and that it was about patience and actually listening to one another. And so I wanted to feel it out, and I was kind of, for like a week or two towards like the beginning of August, like kind of on the fence, I'll admit that. And that's when even the escalations of calling me a mole increased even further. And I can understand it now 2 weeks later when I flip. And I just came to the point where I remember one specific post where I think I even wrote something like checkmate. I think it was someone like Jay Seki. I think that was the name of the account that posted it. Where I found out that Bernie's proposal of a federal jobs guarantee also required someone to opt out of the same welfare benefits. And I saw how the funding mechanism of a VAT being kind of like a flat consumption tax was criticized, but then I saw how Medicare for All was being paid for as a flat income tax over $29K, of 4%. And I'm like, why are we not trying to be consistent here? Especially when we can capture a lot more of the wealth through that consumption tax from those wealthy individuals who don't game the system as they currently do through income taxation. And so I was at this playing field of just saying, I keep thinking that all these policies that Bernie was proposing were the ones that were, better for humanity, even if they weren't better for necessarily myself. I recognize that a universal basic income would help me, and I think a lot of the policies wouldn't help me necessarily of Bernie's at this point in time. I'm a healthy person. I've gone through schooling. I don't have debt. Um, I just have this problem where society's very expensive. And I have this community decay where there's a lot of, maybe it's not me, but my community is not doing as well because there's income inequality in my area very strongly. How we have crumbling infrastructure. Um, I appreciated a lot of like what Bernie like advocated for as the issues. But then I felt like the solutions of Yang would just help me. And I figured I couldn't be alone. The Yang Gang at this point was growing in size after the Rogan interview, too. And I kind of wanted to give solutions that would help me a chance to help everyone. I realized the universal basic income solution was really about freedom. And I think Yang did so well at naming it the freedom dividend. Um, because it allows you to use it in so many different ways. Unconditionally received. It's this sense of security of knowing you can plan for the future and take chances at innovation, take chances on yourself, take chances on your community. Be able to fuel so much of the efforts of activism. Be able to send money more so to the communities that are suffering than those that aren't, because they're not going to be able to consume as much unless they already have money. And so all these consumption taxes to fund it are going to end up benefiting the communities that can't. And I realized, most importantly, we needed to find a solution to come together. That an energy of anger has its own externalities, just like a climate change example with fossil fuels. A movement fueled on anger becomes a culture. And this is one of the things where you start to say that supporters of a movement make a difference on a movement. Um, it's the culture of society. Are we going to be divided and at each other's throats thinking we're at the extremes and that we're only for working people, only for groups of color? Or are we going to try and say that it's literally we're here for everyone? And that we're not going to say that we know best, that the corporate America is being responsible, that there are injustices between the four pillars that I call of life, of the people, of our private institutions, of our government, and of our environment. That we were out of whack where corporations were out of power and that the government was not using funding properly. These two things were in extreme powers and not being done efficiently while our environment and our people crumbled. And so, what are we going to do? Give more power from our private institutions to our government that's already being inefficient? Or are we going to guarantee every single person unconditionally their own ability to determine what they need in their lives? That they can have this impact of being a mind of abundance, that they know that they are a stakeholder in this country, that they are connected to their communities, that they can actually not have to worry that you're going to get another Trump blow up all your good programs. That you had this money and it was yours. They can't take this program away from you. They have this money that's already been put into your hands. It's power. It's fundamentally a redistribution of power from both state and government back to people. And at the same time, correcting in his platform as well this environmental imbalance, because that in turn is why our communities are so unhealthy as well. We don't have this comfortability of security for the future. That's what was so great in what Trump's pitch was. The idea of going back to a time of stability, of unionized jobs, of our infrastructure, instead of crumbling, being rebuilt anew. to have all of our issues scapegoated onto something that was other people. It wasn't your fault that we were failing. You were still a great person. It's just these other things. What we needed to have is that we all need to be together. It's not any of our individual faults. We're just not working together. And we need to come together for a solution to move forward rather than this everlasting tug of war. And so I came to join Yang, even though I was supportive of him since that summer. I joined him, I think it was like August 20th. And it was really great to see me be embraced by so many in the Yang Gang. It was a very touching moment when so many others had tried to basically blacklist me because I turned my back on Bernie. And then going forward, we had such a change. We were moving from insurgent movement to we dominated the internet. We had this power to have influence in that realm. That we were having more debates and more fundraising come in. This was the end of August was when we just started Q3. When we went from that 2.8 million range in fundraising to 10 million, our biggest growth of the whole campaign. This was a very good time for the campaign. We were bringing in so many people from what was encouraging performances, innovative tactics. But then there was this period of time in, I think it was like around November, maybe even like early October, that the Yang campaign kind of had this like change in tone. It brought in the professionals in their mind, the Mulvaney's of the world, the Divines of the world, and the consultants from Clinton campaign and Democracy for America. And the tone started shifting in the emails too at this point, and there was chaos from what was rightfully so. We were seeing all this gain in our fundraising and our efforts online, and we were still having this complete media blackout. Graphics weren't being fairly put on us. We were having Bernie Sanders fans at this point attack Yang Gang way more because they saw this energy coming too. And they kind of treated it like a rivalry finally. Like, I know some people get frustrated by this, but I thought that was a sign of respect. To be treated like all the other candidates and even potentially more so, even though we saw where the results landed. There was a respect that we were fighting for something. And, you know, there were so many things that had happened throughout this campaign, but then around that same point, I was able to reconnect with long-lost friends because of this campaign. I reconnected with my friend Noah Shacker, who I knew from college, and we started a business together, and we had a little confrontation about how that business was being run, and we went our separate ways. And because of this campaign, we came back together at that point. And I was having conflicts at this same time period of life in which I was feeling let down by the healthcare release that Yang had finally put out after long asking after joining what the plan was to get us from starting with a public option to single payer. And he was really the one who was helping me to see how valuable universal basic income was. I remember that same day, just him and I talking about how much technology really is going to be shaping our lives. And I already knew it. I work in technology. I see automation. I see people having their jobs laid off. But like the true potential of what automating away cognitive labor does. The idea of the ease of access to information and the ability to control our data. having this machine learning to the point where we can reach things like a singularity. Because quantum computing and Moore's law are reaching points where we can have this instantaneous communication with one another, because technology is rapidly accelerating in its processing power, and how we need just someone who understands that and can direct it in the right way. And then afterwards, meeting a homeless man on my way back on the bus and stopping off to instead get him a meal. And I was talking to him about just so many of the solutions and really why universal basic income was so important to him. And he told me that he did need his help, but that the programs that he was in, like the housing that he was given, were unsafe, and he was getting bullied there, and how it was a funnel from jails directly to these areas, and how the welfare system had been crushing him because of all the paperwork and gatekeepers he had to go through to get approval for so many of these things, and just his lack of documents being able to be readily on hand for himself because of his circumstance, and how he wants to work a job, but he doesn't feel that all the jobs utilize his skill well, or they put him in an abusive situation where they know he really needs it, and so they take advantage of him. And I laid out to him several of the top priorities that were on my mind at the time. I asked him what he thought of universal basic income. I thought about what he thought about guaranteed housing, what he thought about Medicare for all, what he thought about a federally guaranteed job. And all of them he was very skeptical of. And then he was like, with the universal basic income, he didn't know what the term was, but I told him what it meant. Like, just every month, you would receive $1,000 a month unconditionally that you can use on whatever you'd like. And he cried. He broke down and cried in that Burger King. And I asked him, like, why this made him as emotional as it did. And he told me it was because it would allow him to make a life for himself, but that it gave him the sense of mind and security that he would be okay, that he can get his basic needs done, that he's known what it's like to struggle, and that it was really that he was trapped. He wasn't free. That he had to basically play by the state's rule that runs an inefficient program. He had to work jobs, but that his health wasn't being taken care of, but that even health care wasn't enough to feed him so that he could stay healthy. And that just having this stake from his community of $1,000 back for him to use just gave him this certainty that he could live his own life. And that really resonated with me. I think there's so much empowerment that can just be done if we show our people that we don't think that they're dumb. We don't think that they don't know what's good for them. That we trust them. That we're not paternalistic. And so this was what led me to come really back to the Yang campaign in my one moment of uncertainty about it because of the healthcare release. And I had my frustrations through some of the drama that happened during the campaign, some of the way the campaign staff had organized and reach outs for potentially what seemed like bundling opportunities. But it was really heartening to see us grow and stay together through the growing pains. We went from what was 10 million in quarter three, or technically 9.9 million, to something like 15.2 million in quarter four. And I remember even like my New Year's party, where it was the final day we were fundraising and we shattered records. I remember being so damn proud that we were making it through all the debates, and we just had one of our well, no, the one before that was one of our best. Then the December one was one of the ones where we felt censored, um, and how we hadn't been polled at the time, and we were still fighting through it. We knew that the system was against us at that time, and we pushed through it. And I was shocked. I was at that party, and I was even convincing people, and people liked him, but they didn't think he could win, and that was always the hurdle we had to go through. But that was such a good feeling. We felt like we were in contention territory, where we were in the top 5 of fundraising. And this was the point where we just got the Gambino endorsement too, and that was just such a thrilling experience. He's one of my absolute favorite, Donald Glover, one of my absolute favorite performers, artists, and the idea that he just came forward for such a political movement. I haven't seen him do that before, but he came forward and endorsed Yang. And then soon after, you had Chappelle do it too, and you had so many different stars that were just like, you would never think them to be involved, and they still saw the same thing we did. And it felt like such a conflicting time, because like we had all this growth, we had all this enthusiasm, we felt like we were finally kind of being semi-treated seriously in people's minds when we were having conversations with them, because they've seen him long enough on the stage. And yet we would constantly see these polls that had disappointing results. We would see no polls, and that would disappoint us too. We would constantly have to deal with the MSNBCs of the world making mistakes on their graphics. And this is the same point in time where we started the media blackout and subsequent protest of it. And then we caved on that. And we kind of got fucked over, and there wasn't really much we could do. And that felt very cynical for me. Because our party and the corporate media have this stranglehold, where they're private organizations that have control over a public decision-making process, where they do it for their own interests, where courts have already said that they're allowed to do it for their own self-interests. And we always thought that they were wrong, the polls. And maybe they were, maybe they weren't. The results look like they were more right than wrong over time. But they're also a way that they manufacture consent in a lot of ways. When you see someone down in the polls, you don't treat them seriously, and therefore you don't consider them. When you are not doing well in the polls, the people on cable media don't talk about you. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways, and there are flaws in the methodologies of polling. For instance, a lot of the times the way they have the contact list that they do to be able to reach out to voters is they want long-established voters. So if you have a campaign that has a lot of previous non-voters, or you have cross-party support, they might not pick up on that. Or especially young voters who haven't voted before, that too is a big impact. So it's not perfect, obviously, but it still largely got it right. And then during the same time, now we're like in the year 2020 now, I luckily I find someone from this movement too. Shout out to her at home. We'll eventually reveal that. But it was a really heartening thing to see that through this campaign you can really make lasting connections from this movement. And then we got to our February debate, and it was one of those moments where you just felt things were off. That you go full cynicism. You feel like we're not fighting back, that we're sick. We've put in all this effort. They keep kind of bullying us into irrelevancy of not giving Yang time on stage, cutting his mics off. And we were missing our fundraising goals at that same time period. Like, they were good. We were still even growing from quarter four to quarter one, as we showed in January. But it was starting to slow down where we were missing our goals. It felt that we had kind of scrambled and had this chaotic system in Iowa too, where we knew we didn't do well. But we just had no trust in the system to count things accurately too. And we were all like, we wasted 17 days in Iowa. I mean, it wasn't a waste. We obviously built a movement, but that it could have been better used. And I admit this was the second time I had a loss of faith. I remember I posted, I think it was 2 days, 3 days before New Hampshire, that I had basically accepted that I was going to need to vote for Bernie in June, even though I wanted to be wrong. And I was predicting him to come in sixth in New Hampshire, and I was predicting that there was a small likelihood of, I knew it was very obvious Bennett as well as Deval Patrick were getting out, but I thought there was also a small chance that Yang was going to get out. I had been in some donor conversations. I saw his policy director get fired. And so I thought we were going to make it to Super Tuesday. I really did. But it was a shock. We didn't even get to see what it felt like a full run at New Hampshire, just because it was early that day. I think Yang must have had his internal polling numbers that showed he was doing poorly, and wanted to pull the plug early so that it would be news, but it was a shock, as I'm sure it was for so many of you. And then there comes the end. What did we learn from it? I know personally there are too many lessons for me to go through even on this one video. There really is. But the big ones that I learned from this is that oftentimes you do become the company you keep. And this was part of the reason why humanity first and the idea of positivity oftentimes got kind of eroded when we would constantly interact with Bernie followers attacking us. We would become negative in return, defensively so. It's that we know that this is a movement, that this needs to be bigger than any one person, while also always staying focused on helping people. That you get out of it what you put into it. I know I certainly didn't do everything that I could have to honestly make this the best I could. I try to do as much as I can, but I know I've missed out on opportunities. I wasn't one of those people who followed him throughout the country, volunteering and canvassing. I know I made points in time where I made unnecessary criticisms. But that we have to all move forward and realize that we are all still share a common bond, that we do want to see this through to fruition. That the human spirit to really prosper needs belief in one another. That this is humanity first through and through, and that we can unite what does seem hopelessly divided. That we can stay non-ideological and focused on solutions based on data. That there is something that we're not just fighting for that's new, that's been this fight for decades, if not centuries, in a basic stake of one's community. That we're long overdue for an honest conversation about the power imbalances of our current system, and how that there are still deep inherent flaws that make politics inhumane, whether it be in rhetoric, whether it be financially, whether it be the fundamental rules of how it's run and the organizations that run it. But most of all, what I've learned from this movement is that you need to value the people. And that's fundamentally it. You need to value people. And I gained so much from just the connections I've made. I felt kind of alone in a lot of ways before this movement. I had a couple friends, but I felt there was a genuine desire for everyone to be all right. That you had value as a person, and it didn't matter if we agreed on everything, but that we wanted what was best for you as well, and that we wanted you to be able to become the best you that you were. And that sometimes you don't always get it right, but that we're there to root you on when you get yourself back up, and that we're there to extend a hand to help you get back up too. That made a big difference to me. And now I could ramble all day on the lessons of what I took from the movement and through this campaign experience. Hell, I didn't even touch on my own run for office that was largely inspired from Yang, just an everyday regular person running for office and stepping up when no one else is calling to solve the problems. But I want to move now to some of the things that I found to be strengths and weaknesses of the campaign in general. Something that this movement's not going anywhere. We're pushing on. So it's time we figure out, well, were we always on a long shot that we were never capable of reaching? Or were there some good things that propelled us as far as we did, and some weaknesses that held us back from reaching that final destination in 2020? I think it's the latter. And so I'll start with what I thought were some of our greatest strengths. I think some of our greatest strengths is that, first and foremost, we spoke truthfully, honestly, concisely. We would answer people's questions, and we would not hide our biases. We wouldn't be that traditional politician. People knew that when you got all those other people that are throwing sound bites at you, who are just trying to play the game, we were trying to play our own game. We were trying to rewrite not only the rules of our economy, not only the rules of our society, but of politics in general. We played on our own terms. The second thing is that we had so much talent out there in terms of creativity, in whether it be marketing, in whether it be visual entertainment, whether it be photo editing, whether it be organizing. There was a lot of talent out there that were just volunteers giving it their all. And I think this movement based on data and science and technology and ending poverty outright and working with everyone really brought in so many bright minds to be able to work together for this cause. And I felt, honestly, it was underutilized because I know how many volunteers are just getting ready to go and are trying to find out what's next for them, because it was a very decentralized network. And so this allowed the third point, which is so important. There is a lot of diversity within the Yang Gang movement in terms of experience, in terms of ideology, and this allowed us to have voices that could speak to almost any community. And it allowed us to fine tune where our flaws were really being found and what we could do to become better. It allowed us to really, how do I put this? Police one another too, because you only have one piece of the puzzle, and so it's great to have so many voices to come together to this consensus. And I thought this was certainly represented in volunteerism, and I can go into this in weaknesses, but I thought this was something where we could have had even more strength in our actual staff organization too. Another strength of this campaign is that when you look at voters' concerns, we really knock out of the park one of the top 4 concerns that voters have, and I would say we do it more strongly than any other campaign, and that's the idea of income inequality. We have a very direct and simple way that we can show people an understanding of how we not just tackle the top, but how we help the case at the bottom all the way through the middle class in a universal basic income. Sadly, it's only number 3 on the list. I would say another big thing that we had is obviously we were very skilled at the internet. I think a lot of people grew up in the internet or even joined solely because of the Yang movement. And so that internet presence it allowed us to have our own media source when traditional media was certainly not our friends. And even towards the end, some progressive independent media became not our friends as well. So having this way to be able to break through those gatekeepers of transferring information was really helpful as well. I would say another strength that we had is that we were really well built to be like a lean campaign, a very national campaign. And so it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if we had continued our run, because my feeling is that we would have been stronger as we went along, because although we were not well built for individual states because of being an internet campaign, we were well built for spreading awareness nationally and then being able to build up over time from this starting point of name recognition more turnover of conversions in new places we go to. Now, let's get to some weaknesses. I think some of the biggest weaknesses of this campaign is, as I kind of alluded to, they didn't speak to voters at where they are currently. And I think they didn't speak to voters where they are currently because they're not doing the best they could have to represent healthcare and the environment, first and foremost. Bernie Sanders, to his credit, made this election about Medicare for all. He dragged the conversation from 2016 to that point today, where that's what the Democratic Party is really focused on. It's healthcare. And the second thing is the environment. That is a very clear thing that unites Democrats. And we largely we took for granted, in a way, our Democratic support. We were really good. Number 1 with independents. We were even number 2 with Republicans, if we're just comparing the Democratic field. Tulsi Gabbard was one with Republicans. But we took for granted the Democratic coalition. And it's a little tough because some of the bread and butter, too, of the Democratic coalition runs contrary to what the Yang campaign is about. It never really wanted to get into identity politics, but there is a portion of the community that matters a lot to them. There's a lot of people who consider themselves climate activists who kind of get this gut reaction rather than scientific or database reaction to nuclear. You have a lot of people who have these very implanted minds of the valuation of labor and how that makes such a determination on human worth, and whether it be the necessitation of like a higher minimum wage, whether it be the idea of You have to give opportunities to work rather than just directly, universally helping people, regardless of their work status. How there's so many areas of the Democratic Party that we could be touching, but we became too one issue focused, or even two issue focused. The other one being technology in general. That we kind of stringhorned ourselves into becoming a niche candidate rather than being a contender. We may all dislike Pete Buttigieg, potentially. I know most people who are probably listening to this probably do. But he never kind of got himself fixated into any of the niche conversations because he largely didn't run on much. So you had to just judge him based on his personality and based on his resume. And if you're not paying too much attention, you'll ignore the campaign finance stuff and all that, but you'll focus on the superficial stuff. You're not like judging them on whether you're with universal basic income or not. And it took, to Yang's credit, he did a great job in polling in Iowa of changing minds on universal basic income. But that's kind of what you were deciding on whether you wanted to support him or not. You were saying that is make it or break it. Is that what you care about? You couldn't like kind of have this general candidate who had tons of initiatives because we just weren't communicating it. Most voters want information spoon-fed to them. They want things to be simple. They want things to be really easy to understand. There's a reason we live in a republic and that we don't have a direct democracy, because people fundamentally just don't put in the time necessary to actually fully be engaged in politics all the time. They want someone who will represent all these variety of issues. And when you pull everything back to one thing, they kind of also feel the lack of political expertise, because they say to solve every problem, you go back to this one solution. Well, we know that you can't solve everything with this one thing and think of it as a panacea. Now, the people who listen to him a lot know that he doesn't believe that. We know he doesn't believe that. It's the foundation, and that we're going to build on top of that. But most people don't get to see him beyond what the media shows him or the individual states that organizing's happened in. And because this is a young campaign, we don't have a national organization that's already built into these communities. We have an internet-based like national organization. And because he only at the debates really kind of pulled back to maybe paid family leave, how we need to get away from focusing on Trump, China. He didn't get a lot of speaking time, so he didn't get to go to a lot of his policies. Democracy dollars was included, of course. But yeah, he at the debates didn't get to go to his whole policy because he didn't get a lot of time, and the media didn't give him a lot of time. And so that was a big weakness, obviously. Not even to our own faults, but we did not have an organizing campaign because he was not a politician beforehand, nor a billionaire who could buy it. And the media wasn't willing to give us opportunities to spread that message either. And so people were really looking for those bite-sized pieces, and all they got sold was UBI and technology. And for some, that just wasn't where they are yet. It might be where we're going in the future, and they are important, but you have to talk to people at where they are before you can change their mind to where we should be. And so I thought that was another big weakness as well. And I would say the two last weaknesses that I would say kind of combined to like one is it started towards the end feeling very traditional, both in its advertising. It had non-condemned super PACs that were running. It had advertising directors who ran very traditional advertising. A lot of the unique types of initiatives like giving freedom dividends away no longer continued going forward. We had, let's go through them. What else do we have? Oh, we had the media blackout that we no longer continued to fight on. It felt like we were trying to play the rules by their terms again, rather than kind of pushing more to our strength, which was we were trying to rewrite the rules in our own terms. And that we had all these like quality endorsements and talent out there that were not being utilized because we were only trusting the professionals and the experts, when a lot of these professionals and experts aren't necessarily our strength necessarily. That's not why our message resonates, because we do it as a traditional campaign. We do it because we do new things. And so I thought we kind of gravitated away from that. And so I thought that was another big weakness. And I think the last one, like I already touched on this briefly, but it was kind of how policy is communicated. Like, so much of the social media efforts from the top started to become focused on what the campaign was doing in terms of events and kind of the personalities around the campaign, and it stopped focusing so much on pushing the data and the solutions and saying this is what the solution should be, this solution is poor. Like, there was this period of time where I think it was right around what was it, September potentially, where we had that debate in which Bernie and Yang actually went at it on federal jobs guarantee and UBI. And we were really focused on drawing out and fleshing out the difference between those two policies, and the wealth tax even versus VAT. And then over time, it just kind of gravitated to, like, what could we do on this tour, or how we weren't having things captured. I think we need to focus more on the movement as a whole. What are we fighting for? And not just showing, oh, look how well we're doing, but push for more, rather than saying we're satisfied with where we are, kind of. But with that being said, I want to now move to the next subject that I have. I only have bullet points here in front of me. This has all been just stream of consciousness. I wanted to just say some words directly to Andrew. I don't know why you would be watching this, but if you somehow stumbled across this, I just wanted to say a couple words. First, I just wanted to say thank you. I know this couldn't have been easy for you. I know you made sacrifices through this. I know that you're not satisfied with fully where we reached, but that you're optimistic of where we can keep going. I want you to know that I want you to really appreciate how much you actually did. You brought people together in a way that has not been seen in a long time. You have gotten someone who, up until a year ago, considered themselves a democratic socialist to befriend people who were ardent Trump supporters. You got people who were going through depression in their own lives to get involved and to improve their own lives and to speak up. You ran on ideas that may be right, but were unpopular beforehand. Universal basic income was a very niche idea, and yet you championed that, and you didn't back away from your values. You persevered and you made the case. There were so many politicians who, under pressure, said the popular thing rather than saying what was right, and you were very consistent on speaking your truth. And that should be commended. So thank you for that. If I was to make a recommendation of what could have been done differently, I would say that it's not to lose your advocate mindset, but to better in tune listen to others of where they are. Constantly be looking to improve rather than just being satisfied at any point. And I think you know that personally. I really do. But I think it gets hard. It gets lost. You become satisfied with what something is and pushing forward with it to its limit rather than thinking, do I need to take a step back and repair and make a second push? We get lost in going down the comfortable groove. And so I would challenge you to keep looking to listen. Because I think it's hard. It really, really is hard. But there are areas where we knew that there was room left to grow. that weren't taken into account, whether it be staffing, whether it be policy rollouts, whether it be media events, whether it be utilizing endorsements, whether it be demeanor, like during certain events, being a little bit more serious here and there. You did something that no one thought you could, outlasting House of Representatives members, senators, governors, 100 millionaires. I know it's not a billionaire, but 100 millionaire. And that deserves credit. So thank you so much for your efforts. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you personally decide to do in your future political endeavors. I would hope to hear that someone like a Bernie Sanders might offer you an admin spot, or there will be some that might even consider you for a VP slot. I kind of hope you don't endorse any of them. I really do. I hope you keep using your leverage to have your endorsement come after someone is selected, and that you will actually instead consider making a run at mayor of New York City, or even for a Senate spot like Chuck Schumer's seat, and really just being a campaigner for them on the trail. I think that would be the best thing, is to establish some political experience, not within an admin in which you can be kind of tucked away. You saw how they didn't even treat seriously Julian Castro when he was Secretary of Housing. If you get a VP slot, that's kind of different, but I think you should be looking to try and have an experience where you can actually do policy implementation and you're not kind of held by another president's whim, whether they win as well. So that's where I'm kind of at where I'd make recommendations. I'm so thankful if you did listen to this, for taking that time. And for everyone else, I kind of want to let you know where I'm going, and as well as what I think the overall movement should be doing. I'll start with myself. So what I'm going to be doing is I want to keep this movement going forward. And the thing that I found that was a problem, that I think I can help solve within it, is there was a lack of media infrastructure to be able to compete with some of the progressive independent media. And so we were very fragmented amongst different individual contributors to really spread a message of what we can unifiedly do to push our cause. And I think we need to compete with some of the like TYTs of the world, Majority Reports of the world, that are really established networks that have a mature track record of being able to put out news. We need to be able to have our voice in the conversation, essentially in a sustained manner, so that we can actually push forward our policy. Secondly, I'm going to be assisting in the income movement. So far, I've been getting involved in some of the Twitter initiatives and social media initiatives of the income movement. I'm looking to get myself even more involved. I've only joined in the past, month? So I'll be looking to expand my role. I know we're having a leadership retreat soon that I've been invited to that's out in Portland. So I'm looking to get more involved in the income movement to really spread awareness of universal basic income and make it one of those top priorities for a 2024 election. I'm supporting an election in my hometown. You might have seen a past video where I endorsed Hector Osagura. I did drop out for a reason very similar to why Yang dropped out. I didn't want to take any of your money or take any of your time on a campaign that I didn't expect to win. It was a divided field, and I wanted to help consolidate around a progressive like Hector. I haven't done as much as I would like to have done helping his campaign because I've been supporting the Yang campaign, but I am going to be giving more efforts towards helping him win in June against Albio Sires. On top of that, I'm going to be, in addition to helping run potentially a network, I'm going to have hopefully my own program within it. I will be hopefully continuing on here at the Hill of Roses, although we will see how that works within the network. I am going to be writing a book too. I hope that'll turn out well. It's going to be a novel called The Omegas, so I've been doing some writing through that. I'm going to be enjoying my love life. I started a new relationship while going through the Yang Gang movement, and so I'm gonna give some of my love to that lovely woman and spend some quality time with her. And I hope one day I'll be able to run again for federal office. But in the meantime, I think I'm just going to keep it kind of local until I can kind of establish a family at some point, settle down, make those community ties, and really be able to make a difference at that point. I'm going to be in this election probably supporting Bernie Sanders. I'm it's like 95%, because I honestly feel that there are going to be challenges to any of our agendas if we don't first take down this kind of establishment stranglehold over our party. And even if you don't agree with all their policies, they do fundamentally want to represent the people. They do want to help the people. Their stakeholders are not corporate executives. They're not going into wine caves. They're not going by super PACs. They're by the people, and people want their agenda. There's a reason why they're number one in fundraising currently. And they're going to be able to help us achieve some, not all, of our democratic reforms, like so that we can actually have a more representative government. They're going to be able to probably push through healthcare reform. It's not going to be single payer. Honestly, in my opinion, it's going to get compromised down when it goes through Congress. But you know what? They're going to end up at a better version of a public option than you're going to get leading with someone like Pete Buttigieg or Joe Biden. You're going to get college education, probably at least debt-free. I honestly think a lot of the solutions that moderates propose are what Bernie's going to end up with, but only because he started from the stronger positioning of anchoring. I don't think he's going to get through every part of his agenda, but I think he's going to be able to get through something because he starts from a point of strength. He's a great organizer. I think he understands the right issues that we need to be tackling, even if his solutions aren't perfect. And I think it's going to go a long way, depending on where Yang decides to take himself. As I said before, I don't hope he endorses anyone personally. But if he did get offered a VP ship for, let's say, a Bernie out there, yeah, you should take that. That would go a long way and help. Also, if he chooses to endorse Tulsi Gabbard, I would certainly be willing to back Tulsi Gabbard. I have a fair deal of respect for her. She endorses a universal basic income and ranked choice voting, which Bernie doesn't. Bernie does support ranked choice voting, but he's not an advocate for it. He doesn't propose it on his platform. And she's been a better friend to Yang throughout this process, in standing up for him in some of these media blackouts and what the party had done to some of his requests, compared to the allowance they did for Bloomberg. And I think there is also value in championing her, even to the point where she decides to maybe drop out herself at some point. It's not that it's guaranteed as an inevitability. I'd love to be shocked. I'd love Tulsi to somehow make it to June and have a choice of who I want to vote for, because there's two different competitive candidates. But I currently see that she's not competitive, even though she did, to her credit, beat Andrew Yang in New Hampshire. But I think there's value in advocating for her, because I think we need someone in this race for longer who genuinely wants to do right by all Americans, not just some group of them, who wants to help bring unity for the people, someone who's championing a universal basic income, and frankly, someone who will stand up to what so many party leadership members are doing under the shadow in Iowa, and potentially with what could be to come in Nevada. Although they got rid of the app, they put in a new one, and then they got themselves a voter integrity person who was from the Pete Buttigieg campaign. So we need someone who's just going to call out the DNC and has no fear in doing it. And I think Tulsi Gabbard represents that voice. But where I think the Yang Gang themselves should go, because I know not all of you are going to want to vote for Bernie. I really understand why you don't. Trust me, the movement in a lot of ways has left a sour taste in my mouth. I'm not necessarily enthusiastic about this pick compared to Yang, but I do think it's the right cause to fight for. I get that you don't like some of his solutions, like a federal jobs guarantee, or that you think full single payer might be a step too far in your opinion. And so I respect where you, as an individual, take your vote. I will rightfully be here in the Bernie camp, in my opinion, but you can rightfully be wherever you think is right. But what I would say is that don't divide yourselves. Don't swear your allegiances to somewhere else and just give up. This movement's going to keep going. It's going to go 2024 or 2028 potentially. And we need to come together because fundamentally the problems are not going away. And we need each other to be able to be stronger to solve them. And so I think what we need to be doing is building up our organizing infrastructure, taking our movements to the local level, having people run in 2022, as well as supporting those that are already running in 2020, so that we can get this movement to the point where we have more key endorsements, more surrogates, more of an organization to collect donations in the future, more knowledge of these policies across all demographics. Having this be a movement not about one candidate, but having it be a movement about a movement. And I think that's fundamentally, we have to take the lessons of some of the Bernie camp. They understood from 2016 to 2020, they needed to shift and adapt and learn. And they didn't do everything right in that learning and adapting. But that they knew that they had to put the time in, that they had to build around others, that they needed to elevate more voices into the conversation, and that they also needed to double down and not just give in and accept what's given. It's time to push back even further. And I think I'm not going to be a vote blue no matter who voter. I have 2, maybe 3. I could even be pushed to 4 candidates left in this race I'd consider. But the rest, no. It's just not going to happen. And I'd rather give a vote to the third party in the cases where a Bloomberg, a Buttigieg, a Biden, even potentially like a Warren and Klobuchar are nominated. I'm not going to say that it's the right choice for swing states, but in these blue states, we need to use our voice to hopefully get them funding. And we have to think about the prospects of, if things are rigged, honestly, forming a new party. I think that's something that needs to be considered as well. But most of all, don't disengage. Don't not vote. That's the worst thing we can do. It just shows that we can be pushed aside and that only some voices should be heard. Make your voice heard, regardless. There's down ballot initiatives that need help, and you need to be on those voter registration rolls so you can be polled in the future too, potentially. So I think that's really important. I think we need to stay engaged and we need to stay together, and that we have to accept that we made mistakes and accept that we made some really right decisions too. And we need to keep moving forward, try and be less fragmented in our division currently, find key initiatives that we want to unite behind, and go. And that one way or another, the problems won't end unless we are willing to take action ourselves and run. Because that's what Andrew Yang did. He was a random man who decided he had enough. No one was talking about the issues, and so he would try and get it done. We need more people to act like that. And I hope you will do that too. Because that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to keep on pushing forward. It's not always going to be perfect. There are going to be times you stumble. But giving up is not an option we can accept. It's just not. That's not humanity first. Humanity first is putting humans first. And if we give up on them, that means we put them last. And that's something I'm just not willing to accept. And so with that being said, my friends, I'm so happy you sustained me rambling. I'm sure there's so much I missed saying. I really do. It's really hard to put in one video what feels like a lifetime of political revolution in a way. I know it's only been a year, but honestly, does it feel it? I know Yang's been running even more than that, and there are early adopters who felt even more than that. I can't imagine what you all are going through, because I think that's the thing about the internet. That's the thing about really getting yourself invested. Everything just feels like it's much longer. And I'm going to remember so many of the memories from this campaign. I really, really will. But with that being said, please let me know down below in the comments some of the things that you think I missed, because I'm sure I did. Let me know what you thought of my comments, because frankly, in the stream of consciousness, I'll probably come back and watch some and not be exactly 100% in agreement with everything that I even said. With that being said, I will also be back with the Hill of Roses soon. I am hoping to have on new guests. I'm looking forward to announcing what's going to be the Humanity First Network. That'll be coming out with details in the near future. We have right now over 20 volunteers, so that'll be a really fun initiative that'll be coming out. And I'm sure there will be more to come. I'm certainly not going anywhere. I will certainly be making more announcements. And thank you so much for taking the time. Until next time, my friends, my rosebuds out there, stay rosy out there.